Book 3, September 1955, Chapter 3. 4 months later, early Sunday morning of Labor Day weekend, Michael Corleone lay in his bed in Las Vegas, his wife beside him, his 2 kids right down the hall, all of them sound asleep. Yesterday in Detroit, at the wedding of the daughter of his late father's oldest friend, Michael had given the merest nod toward Sal Narducci, a man he barely knew, putting in motion a plan designed to hurt every formidable rival the Corleones still had. If it worked, Michael would emerge blameless. If it worked, it would bring lasting peace to the American underworld. The final bloody victory of the Corleone family was at hand. A trace of a smile flickered on Michael Corleone's surgically repaired face. His breathing was even and deep. Otherwise, he was motionless, untroubled, basking in the cool air of his new home, enjoying the sleep of the righteous. Outside, even in the pale morning light, the desert baked. Near the oily banks of the Detroit River, 2 lumpy men in silk short-sleeved shirts, one aquamarine, the other day-glow orange, emerged from the guest cottage of an estate belonging to Joe Zalucci, the Don of Detroit, the man who'd saved his city from arbitrary violence of the Purple Gang. The one in orange was Frank Falcone, formerly of Chicago and now the head of organized crime in Los Angeles. The one in aquamarine, Tony Molinari, was his counterpart in San Francisco. Behind them came 2 men in overcoats, each carrying 2 suitcases, each suitcase containing, among other things, a tux worn to last night's Clemenza Zalucci nuptials. The surface of the water was awash in dead fish. From the barn-sized garage, a limo came to get them. When the limo pulled out onto the street, a police car followed it. The cop was on Zalucci's payroll. At Detroit City Airport, they turned down a dirt access road and drove alongside a fence until they got to a gate marked emergency vehicles only. The police car stopped. The limo kept going, right onto the tarmac. The silk-shirted men got out, sipping coffee from paper cups. Their bodyguards practiced karate moves. A plane taxied toward them, bearing the logo of a meatpacking concern in which Michael Corleone had a silent, controlling interest. The logo featured a profile of a lion. The name of the pilot's birth certificate was Fausto Dominic Garacci Jr., but the license clipped to the visor read Gerald O'Malley. The flight plan he'd turned in was blank. Garacci had a guy in the tower. At airports all over America, Garacci had the use of planes that did not on paper belong to him. Under his seat was a satchel full of cash. Storm clouds filled the western sky. Across the river, just outside Windsor, the door to room 14 of the Happy Wanderer Motor Inn opened just a crack. Framed there was Fredo Corleone, his brother's new appointed sottocapo, a man shaped like a bowling pin and dressed in last night's rumpled shirt and tux pants. He looked out to the parking lot. He didn't see anyone walking around. He waited for a piece of junk car to chug by. It was loud enough to wake a person up. Fredo was aware of some stirring on the bed behind him, but the last thing he was going to do was look back. Finally, the coast was clear. He pulled a pork pie hat low over his eyes, eased the door closed behind him, and hurried around the corner, down an embankment, and crossed the drive-in theater, filthy with discarded cups and popcorn buckets. The buckets were adorned with fat blue clowns, heads cocked, faces contorted into gruesome, knowing smiles. The hat wasn't his. Maybe it belonged to the man in that room or else came from one of Fredo's many stops last night. It may have even belonged to one of his bodyguards. They were new, strangers to him. His head pounded. He patted his shirt pockets, his pants pockets. He had left his smokes back in the room. His lighter, too. The lighter was a present from Mike, jeweled from Milan. It was engraved Christmas 1954, but with no name, of course. "Never put your name on anything," his old man always said. Fredo didn't even break stride. Fuck it. He jumped a muddy ditch and jogged across the parking lot of an apartment building. He had hidden the car, a Lincoln that Zalucci had lent him, behind a trash incinerator. The coat of his tux was balled up in the back seat, along with a yellow satin shirt, which wasn't his, and a whiskey bottle, which was. He got in. He took a drink and tossed the bottle onto the passenger seat. It may, he thought, be time to take a break from the booze. And the other thing, Jesus, how can a thing you want so bad seem so repulsive right after you do it? He'd quit that too. No more after-hours clubs. No more paying for it from junkies too messed up to know whose dick they sucked. Easy enough to start today, heading home to Vegas, where he was a known ladies' man, where the town was so small he couldn't get the other thing anyway. He put the car in gear and drove away as if he were someone's pious Canadian grandpa on the way to Mass, though he did, at a stoplight, finish off the whiskey. He hit the main drag and sped up. At this place, he'd make the plane to Vegas easy. It started to rain. Only when he flicked on the wipers did he notice that there was a piece of paper under the passenger side blade, a handbill or something. Back in the darkness of room 14 of the Happy Wanderer, the naked man on the bed awoke. He was a restaurant supply salesman from Dearborn, married, 2 kids. He moved the pillow from his crotch and rose. He smelled his fingertips. He rubbed his eyes. "Troy?" he called. "Hey, Troy!" "Oh, hell, not again!" "Troy!" Then he saw the lighter. He saw Troy's gun. Troy struck him as the kind of guy who'd carry a gun, but not this kind. This was a cowboy gun, a Colt 45, its grip and trigger covered with white adhesive tape. The naked man had never touched a real gun before. He sat back down on the bed. He felt faint. He was a diabetic. Somewhere there should be oranges. He remembered Troy giving a bartender $50 to go to the kitchen and get a bag of oranges. He ate 3 right at the bar, while Troy walked to the door and looked out into the street, waiting until he'd finished eating and the peels were gone. The man could not remember what happened to the rest of the oranges. His heart revved and sweat poured out of him. He called the front desk and asked for room service. "Where you think you are?" said the desk clerk. "The Ritz?" Good question. Where was he? He wanted to ask, but first he had to do something about his blood sugar. Was there any food at all? He asked. A vending machine or something? Any way he could get the clerk to bring him, let's just say, a candy bar? "Your leg's busted?" the clerk asked. The man said he'd pay $5 for a candy bar to be delivered to his room. The clerk said he'd be right there. The man needed to call his wife. This had happened before. He had said it was a secretary, a woman. He had promised his wife it wouldn't happen again. He started to dial, then realized he needed the clerk for an outside line. The clerk must have been off getting the candy. The man had a good job, great wife, great kids, nice house. He was a newly initiated Rotarian. Yet here he was, after a night with some street tough, doing those things, waking up on a Sunday morning in a place like this. He got up again to look for oranges. No luck. He saw his pants, but not his yellow shirt. He couldn't find his pork pie hat. He didn't know the name of the dive where he'd left his car. He'd have to take a cab home, shirtless, then have his wife drive him around seedy neighborhoods, looking for it. It'd be easier just to buy a new car. He picked up the gun. The Colt felt even heavier than it looked. He ran his finger along the barrel. He opened his mouth. He rested the end of the gun on his tongue and held it there. He heard the squeal of tires outside. It was a big car. He could tell from the sound of the slamming door. It must be Troy, coming back for him. Then a second car door slammed. 2 men. They'd come all the way from Chicago. They weren't coming for him, though the naked man didn't know that. They'd been following him for hours, which he also didn't know. The naked man pulled the Colt out of his mouth, stood, and trained it on the door. "See you in hell," he whispered. He had heard someone say it in a movie. He wasn't a tough guy, but his fingers curled around the pearly butt of that six-shooter. He sure as hell felt like it. In Hollywood, Florida, under the carport of the coral-colored house where she'd lived since her father, Sonny, died in that car wreck. She had no reason to believe it was anything other than what she'd been told. Francesca Corleone honked the horn of her mother's station wagon for a good 10 seconds. "Stop it," said her twin sister, Kathy, sprawled across the back seat, reading some French novel in French. Kathy was headed off to Barnard. She wanted to be a surgeon. Francesca was going to Florida State, in Tallahassee, and wanted, mostly, to be on with it, out of the house, on her own. Though with all this horrible business in New York and how that side of the family had gotten the family name in the papers, even if it was all lies, this might not be the easiest time to start a new life. Kathy had wanted to go to school in New York, partially to be close to all their family up there. Now, of course, everyone had moved away except for Grandma Carmela and their horrible Aunt Connie. Apparently, Uncle Carlo had simply disappeared. One of those jerks who went out for cigarettes and never came back. A lousy thing to do, even for a creep like him. But Francesca had to admit that anyone married to Aunt Connie would have had to consider it. Kathy, especially up there, would probably get asked every day, even by her professors, if she was any relation to those notorious gangsters, the Corleones. If the past few months in Hollywood were any indication, Francesca would have to have braced for this too, even in Tallahassee. Her mother, the controlling shrew, was driving both of them. Driving! To New York! Thank God Francesca would get dropped off first. She honked again. "That's very annoying," said Kathy. "As if you're really reading that book." Kathy answered in what was either French or fake French. Francesca hadn't taken a language and planned to evade the issue either by taking Italian, which, in truth, she didn't know all that well, or by majoring in something with no language requirement. "We're Italian," Francesca said. "Why aren't you learning Italian?" "Sei una fregna per sicuro," Kathy answered. "Nice mouth." Kathy shrugged. "You can swear in Italian," Francesca said, "but you can't read Italian." "I can't read at all unless you shut up." Their mother was next door to their grandparents' house, and had been there for ages, laying down last-minute care and feeding instructions for Francesca's brother, Frank, 15, and Chip, 10. Chip's real name was Santino Jr., and, until he had come home from baseball practice one day this summer and announced that he would henceforth only answer to Chip, had been called Tino. Francesca could probably do that. She could go to college and take on another name. Fran Collins, Franny Taylor, Frances Wilson. She could, but she wouldn't. They had already Americanized the pronunciation from Corleone to Corleone, and that was change enough. She was proud of her name, proud to be Italian. She was proud that her father had rebelled against his gangster father and brothers and become a legitimate businessman. Anyway, Francesca's name would change in good time, when she found a husband. Francesca honked again. What was taking so long in there? Nonna and Papa would ignore every word Francesca's mother said. Those boys got away with murder, especially Frankie, especially once the football thing started. Francesca honked once more. "You're making it much easier," said Kathy, and Francesca finished the sentence. "For you to leave, I know." Kathy sighed as only an American girl can. Moments later, she stroked the back of Francesca's hair softly. The twins had never in their 18 years spent a night apart. Hal Mitchell's castle in the Sand Hotel and Casino never closed. Neither these days did Johnny Fontaine, who'd done his 2 shows, 8 and midnight, and been up all night, showing the swells and pallies a good time. Then, for luck, since he had a session today, to his suite, where there were 2 chicks. One was a blonde French girl who danced at the casino across the way and said she had one line, "Gosh, look!" in that Mickey Rooney picture they'd filmed here last year. The one where Mickey's a prospector in the desert, and there's a bomb test, and the dose of radiation he gets makes it so any slot machine he touches pays off. There's no scene with wise guys beating the shit out of Mickey Rooney. The other was a luscious brunette with a C-section scar who was probably paid to be there. Fine by him, by Johnny's stars. The worthiest of human attainments was to be a professional. When he had asked a total gentleman about it, if either of them had a problem going to bed, all 3 of them, they'd laughed and started to strip. The brunette, who'd said her name was Eve, had a flair for it, knowing just when it was the blonde's turn to suck Johnny's dick. When she saw the size of it, she grinned and whispered, "Gosh, look!" Or when it was her turn to do it up against that fountain in the middle of the room while the blonde rubbed his back. Eve knew the perfect time to push Johnny down on his back and maneuver the blonde onto his cock, and for the first time in the whole deal to start pawing the blonde's tits and kissing her, which sent Johnny off in a matter of seconds. It was a gift. A lot of women didn't have it. The blonde, her name was Rita, short for Marguerite. He never forgot their names in the morning. Was still there, asleep, when he'd left to come up here to the roof, to the pool. He hated men who tested the water with their pinky toe. He tossed off his heavy robe and jumped into the deep end. When the shock wore off, he went under again, holding his breath and counting to 200. His head pounded, and not from the depth of the water. He didn't drink as much as people thought, at least not anymore. The secret? Go from table to table, joint to joint, leaving half-finished drinks everywhere, which no one notices, while at the same time accepting every new one that comes his way, which everyone notices. Any poor mook who tried to match his drink for drink got folded into the back of a cab and sent home, courtesy of Johnny Fontaine. He controlled his drinking. He controlled what he did and who he did it with. He surfaced. He swam a couple laps to limber up, then took a deep breath and went under again. He repeated the drill 3 more times and got out. At the end of the deck, on the far edge of the roof, was a billboard. "Have a blast! Best view of the bomb in Las Vegas." Underneath a painting of a purple-orange mushroom cloud, on movable letters, was a time, tomorrow morning. Early tomorrow morning. Johnny had heard they were going to set up a bar, a breakfast buffet, even crown some broad Miss Atomic Bombshell. What sort of sucker would get up at dawn to watch a bomb go off 60 miles away? Maybe they think they'll start to glow and set off the slot machines. People want to pay to watch a bomb. They ought to see Johnny's last picture. He grabbed his robe and took the stairs 2 at a time, down to his room. She was gone. Rita. Good kid. The room still smelled like whiskey, smokes, and pussy. The statue of the naked lady in the fountain, whose outflung arm had seemed at the time like it was made to hold on to, needed repairs. He got dressed and, just to make sure he didn't nod off on the way to L.A., took one of the little green pills Dr. Jules Siegel had prescribed. Johnny Fontaine emerged in the brutal sunlight of the castle's VIP parking lot and did not flinch. He grabbed his lapels, so sharp they could cut meat, straightened his jacket, and climbed into his new red Thunderbird. The cops here knew this car. He had that bird going over 100 before he even left town. He checked his watch. In a couple hours, the musicians would start trickling into the studio. They had spent an hour tuning and gassing. Then for another hour or so, Eddie Niels, his musical director this time out, would have them rehearsing. Johnny should make it in time. Lay down the first few tracks. Get in the airport by 6. Hop on the charter along with Falcone and Gussie Cicero. And be back here in plenty of time for the private show he'd said he'd do for Michael Corleone. It wasn't until 4 in the morning, after he arrived, exhausted, at the guest suites at the Vista del Mar Golf and Racquet Club, that Tom Hagen realized he'd forgotten his racket. The pro shop didn't open until 9, the same time Hagen was supposed to meet the ambassador on Court 14. Hagen couldn't bear to be late. He asked the desk clerk if he might borrow a racket, and the clerk looked at him as though he'd tracked mud on the lobby's white carpeting. He told the man he had an early court time and asked if there was any way he could get into the pro shop now, and the clerk shook his head and said he didn't have a key. Hagen asked if there was anything that could be done, either now or at some time before 8:30 tomorrow, and the clerk apologized and said no. Hagen took out $200 bills and told the clerk he'd be grateful if there was anything humanly possible that could be done, and the man just smirked. Hagen had begun yesterday in his own bed in Las Vegas, then, before dawn, flown with Michael Corleone to Detroit, first for a meeting with Joe Zalucci on his daughter's wedding day, then the wedding itself, an appearance at the reception, and finally a flight back to Vegas. Mike had been able to go home and go to sleep. Hagen went to the office for an hour of paperwork and then a quick stop home, to change and to kiss his sleeping daughter, Gianna, who just turned 2, and his wife, Teresa, who had become an art collector and was excited about a Jackson Pollock that had just arrived from her dealer in New York. His boys, Frank and Andrew, were teenagers, each behind a closed door in a bedroom strewn with science fiction paperbacks and records by Negroes, both of them unkissable now. As Tom Hagen packed his tennis gear, Teresa walked around their new house holding the gorgeous paint-splattered thing in front of various white walls. She had taken advantage of the move to Las Vegas and the expanses of blank surfaces to go on a buying spree. The paintings were worth several times more than the house itself. He loved being married to a woman with taste. "What about opposite the red Rothko in the central hallway?" she called. "What about the bedroom?" he said. "You think?" she said. "Just a thought," he said. He met her gaze and cocked an eyebrow to indicate that it wasn't the location of the painting he was talking about. She sighed. "Maybe you're right." She set down the painting and took his hand. Marriage. But he had been far too tired, and things hadn't gone particularly well. Hagen was no longer the Corleone consigliere, but with the death of Vito Corleone, who'd succeeded Hagen in the job, and with Tessio dead, too, and Clemenza in the process of taking over in New York, Michael needed an experienced hand. He was waiting to announce a new consigliere until he felt sure that the war with the Barzinis and Tattaglias was definitely over. Michael had something up his sleeve, but all Hagen had been able to figure out was that it had something to do with Cleveland. In the meantime, Hagen was still doing his old job and trying to move on to his next thing too. He was 45 years old, older than either of his parents had been when they died, and definitely too old for this shit. Now he rose to the knock of the room service he had the foresight to order before going to bed. He downed the first cup of coffee before the door closed behind the bellboy. Weak, the way it was everywhere out here. Hagen congratulated himself for guessing beforehand that he'd need 2 carafes. He took the first one out on the balcony. 8 a.m., the sun barely over the mountains, and already it was baking hot. Who needed a sauna? By the time Hagen finished the first pot of coffee, 10 minutes, give or take, the robe that had come with the room was soaked. Hagen shaved, showered, dressed in his tennis clothes, and was standing outside the pro shop at 8:30, waiting for someone to arrive. After a few interminable minutes, he went back to the desk. A different clerk said that the manager was here now and he'd page him. Hagen went back outside the pro shop. The wait was excruciating. If there was one thing he'd learned from Vito Corleone, and what hadn't he learned from him, it was promptness. He paced back and forth and dared not to go to the men's room for fear he'd miss the manager or some other arriving employee. When finally someone came to open up, a Slavic woman who looked more like a masseuse than a manager or club pro, it was 9 on the dot. Hagen grabbed a racket, slapped $200 on the front counter, and told her to keep the change. "We don't take cash," she said. "You have to sign for it." "Where do I sign?" "Are you a member? I don't recognize you." "I'm a guest of Ambassador Shia's." "He needs to be the one to sign for it." "Him or a family member or his valet." She pronounced it to rhyme with mallet. Hagen took out another 100 and said that if she could find it in her heart to straighten all this out, there was more than enough money here for the racket and her time. She had looked at him the same way last night's clerk had, but she took the money. Hagen thought his bladder would burst, but by now it was 5 after 9. He tore the cardboard off the racket and broke into a dead sprint. Those exact words occurred to him, dead sprint. When he got to Court 14, 10 minutes late, there was no one there. He was so rarely late that he had no idea what to do. Had the ambassador already been here and left? Was he late too? How long should Hagen wait? Would it make sense to go take a leak and come back? He looked around. A lot of bushes, but this wasn't the sort of place where a guy ought to be pissing in the bushes. So he stood there, hopping from foot to foot, holding it. Surely the ambassador had come and gone. Finally, he couldn't take it anymore, and he ran to the nearest men's room. When he got back to the Court 14, a note was pinned to the net. "Ambassador Shia, unable to play tennis this AM. Late brunch? 2. Poolside. A man will pick you up." The note didn't say where. Kay Corleone pointed back toward the road to the Las Vegas airport. "He missed our turn," she said. "Michael, we missed our turn." Next to her in the back seat of their new yellow Cadillac, Michael shook his head. Kay frowned. "We're driving all the way to Los Angeles? Are you out of your mind?" It was their 5th anniversary. She and the kids, and even her mother and Baptist pastor father, had already been to Mass. Michael had business tonight, before, during, and after the private show Johnny Fontaine was doing as a favor for the Teamsters. But he had promised her that the whole day up until then would be one long date, like old times, only better. Michael shook his head. "We're not driving, and we're not going to Los Angeles." Kay turned around in her seat, looking back toward the road not taken, then turned to her husband. Abruptly, she had what felt like a block of ice in her guts. "Michael," she said, "forgive me, but I think this marriage has withstood about all the surprises that—" She made circles with her hands, like a sports official signaling improper movement of some sort. He smiled. "This will be a good surprise," he said. "I promise." Soon they came to Lake Mead, near a dock with a seaplane moored to the end. The plane was registered to Johnny Fontaine's movie production company, though neither Fontaine nor anyone who worked there knew anything about it. "Surprise number 1, Michael said, pointing to the plane. "Oh, brother," she said, "number 1? You've counted them up? You really should have become a mathematics professor." The illicit thrill she had once gotten from what he'd become instead had waned enough that she might actually have meant this. They got out of the car. "That's counting," he said. "At most counting, not mathematics." He held out his hand toward the dock. "M'lady." Kay wanted to say she was afraid, but did not, could not. She had no reason whatsoever to think that he might do her harm. "Surprise number 2. "Michael." "Is that I'm flying." Her eyes widened. "I started pilot training in the Marines," he said. "Before I was, sent to fight in 120-degree heat for tunnel-riddled coral islands ladled with a maggoty stew of mud and corpses. For some reason flying relaxes me," he said. "I've been taking lessons." Kay exhaled. She hadn't realized she was holding her breath. She hadn't realized that, In all those unaccounted-for hours the past few weeks, she was afraid he was having an affair. That's not true. What she was afraid of was worse. "It's good you have a hobby," she ventured. "Everyone needs a hobby. Your father had his garden. Other men have golf." "Golf?" he said. You don't have a hobby, do you?" "I don't," she said.
"There's always golf."
He was wearing a tailored sport coat and a stark white shirt with no necktie. He hadn't slicked his hair. A light wind tousled it.
"Actually," she said, "what do you think if I went back to teaching?"
"That's a job," Michael said. "You don't need a job. Who'd watch Marie and Anthony?"
"It wouldn't start until we're settled. By then your mother will be here and she could do it. Carmela will be thrilled to do it."
Though Kay actually dreaded hearing what her mother-in-law would say about Kay working outside the home.
"Really, all it would be is a hobby."
"Do you want a job?" Michael said. She looked away. A job wasn't exactly the point. "Let me think about it." His father wouldn't have approved, but he was not his father. Michael had once, like his father, been married to a nice Italian girl, and Kay did not know that and was not that girl. What concerned Michael was security, even though it was part of the code that the risks to her were slight. Michael put a hand on her arm and gave it a gentle squeeze. Kay put her hand on top of his. She took a deep breath.
"Well, look," she said. "I'm not getting in that contraption. At least not until you tell me where we're going."
Michael shrugged. "Tahoe," he said. A grin flickered on his face. "Lake Tahoe." He gestured to the seaplane. "Obviously." She told him once she'd love to go there. She hadn't thought he had been listening. He opened the door to the plane. Kay got in. As she did, her dress both hiked up and stretched taut across her ass. Michael felt a wild impulse to grab her hips from behind, but instead just let his eyes linger. There was nothing better, nothing sexier, than looking at your wife like this without her knowing it. "Now, the only tricky part about float planes," Michael said as he got in and started the engine, "is that sometimes they flip."
"Flip?"
Kay said. "Rarely." He stuck out his lower lip, as if to indicate the lightning strike unlikelihood of such a thing. "And if a float plane flips, guess what? It floats." Kay regarded him.
"That's comforting."
"I do love you," he said. "You know that, right?" She tried for the expressionlessness Michael had mastered all too well.
"That's also comforting."
Their takeoff was so smooth that Kate felt her every muscle relax. She hadn't been aware that they were clenched. She had no idea for how long.